a perspective of how players are going to look at this money, and you can tell from her reaction, it's like, whoa, that's a whole different level of cash we're talking about.
The max was $90,000.
I mean, even just say, like, you haven't been playing the league for what, 1-2 years or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Let's just even talk now. You're a current.
Okay, I'm a current player.
These players are making max $250.
Now I'm making $250, then $90. And let's see, $5 million, $2 million. I mean, guys, you do the math. Who's going to turn that down? And then I have a chance to have equity in this league, and this league could.
The shift didn't happen gradually. It wasn't a slow build or a quiet behind-the-scenes negotiation. It hit like a jolt. Sudden, unavoidable, and impossible to ignore. One moment, women's basketball looked like it was finally settling into a new era of momentum, visibility, and rising stars. And then, almost overnight, something changed. Whispers started swirling in locker rooms, agents stopped speaking in half sentences, and a new kind of tension settled across the league, an unspoken acknowledgement that the ground beneath the WNBA might be moving. Not because of a scandal or a team meltdown, but because a force outside the league's walls had stepped into the picture, armed with resources no one believed were real. And now, in a twist no one saw coming, the future of the entire sport may hinge on one decision, made by one player, at a moment when the stakes have never been higher. For months, the name Project B floated around like a rumor too ridiculous to take seriously. Something players joked about during road trips, or mentioned in passing when discussing fantasy scenarios where women's basketball finally got the financial respect it deserved. But the joke stopped being funny when the numbers started surfacing. Reports began circulating that this wasn't some fringe startup or wishful thinking from restless agents. This was a fully funded, privately backed operation preparing to launch with a war chest big enough to flip the entire ecosystem of women's basketball upside down. The figures being whispered weren't small upgrades or modest incentives, they were seismic. Rumors suggest that the baseline salary, the absolute minimum for a bench player who barely cracks the rotation, could hit $2 million a year. And those same reports claim that stars could command sums that sound more like tech founder payouts than athlete contracts. Suddenly, the WNBA's decade-long struggle to justify six-figure salaries looks painfully outdated. Project B isn't offering competition, it's offering escape. It's the kind of financial shockwave that doesn't just disrupt the league, it exposes every weakness it tried to hide. And the moment those numbers leaked, everyone in the WNBA knew the conversation had changed forever. The arrival of Project B didn't just introduce a rival league. It pulled back the curtain on something the WNBA has tried to downplay for years. For all the progress, all the visibility, all the celebrations of growth, the league has always been built on a fragile financial foundation. The pay gap wasn't a secret, but it was easy to ignore when there was no alternative. As long as overseas contracts were the only escape hatch, the WNBA could frame those stints as temporary side missions rather than a symptom of deeper issues. But the moment Project B appeared with salaries that dwarfed anything the WNBA could offer, the weakness became impossible to hide. Suddenly, loyalty didn't look noble. It looked expensive. Staying in the WNBA meant choosing pride over stability, symbolism over security. And for players who have spent years juggling off-season leagues just to make ends meet, the idea of sacrificing millions for the sake of tradition makes less and less sense. What Project B really exposes is the reality that the WNBA's financial structure hasn't kept pace with its stars. The league has leaned heavily on passion, perseverance, and the players' commitment to building something bigger. But passion has limits when the paycheck doesn't match the work. Even players who love the league can't ignore the fact that their bodies have an expiration date, and every year they spend underpaid is a year they never get back. Reports suggest Project B isn't just offering higher salaries, it's offering a system built around long-term financial respect, something WNBA players have quietly wanted for decades. And once that contrast is out in the open, the question shifts from, would anyone leave the WNBA, to, Why would anyone stay if they don't have to? Project B didn't create the weakness. It simply revealed how massive the gap really is. When Angel McCoughtry speaks, people in women's basketball listen. Not because she's loud, but because she's earned every ounce of her credibility over nearly 2 decades in the game. This isn't someone tossing out hot takes for attention. This is a 6-time All-Star, a 2-time scoring champion, and one of the most respected veterans the WNBA has ever produced. She's lived the grind, survived the injuries, played overseas for real money, and watched younger players step into the same financial struggles she once faced. So when she sat down on the Good Follow podcast and started breaking down what Project B was offering, the entire conversation about women's basketball shifted. She didn't wrap her words in PR polish or pretend the situation was complicated. She laid out the math in plain, brutal terms. Numbers that make the WNBA's current structure look like an outdated relic. McCoughtry explained that the rumored $2 million minimum isn't a fantasy. It's the kind of offer that forces players to reconsider everything they thought they knew about loyalty. Coming from her, it didn't sound like speculation. It sounded like experience talking. She pointed out something players rarely admit publicly. When you've spent most of your career scraping by on salaries that barely cover the cost of living, you don't dismiss life-changing money. You don't ignore the chance to secure your family's future. You don't turn away from an opportunity that pays you what you're actually worth. And she didn't stop there. She openly acknowledged the locker room politics, the unspoken tensions, the veteran frustrations that outsiders never see, factors that only make Project B's offers even more attractive. In a league where players are often expected to speak carefully and avoid controversy, McCoughtry's honesty hit like a warning shot. She wasn't attacking the WNBA. She was telling the truth the league has avoided for years. Her message was simple. If these numbers are real, players would be foolish to not consider leaving. Coming from anyone else, it might have been dismissed as exaggeration, but coming from Angel McCoughtry, it felt more like a reality check. One that players, fans, and even the WNBA itself can't afford to ignore. The moment Sophie Cunningham opened up about fans misunderstanding WNBA players, the reaction online was instant and explosive. What she intended as a defense of her peers quickly spiraled into a debate she never saw coming. She suggested that the aggressive on-court moments people criticize are just the heat of competition, not reflections of who players are off the floor. And on its own, that point makes sense. Athletes across every sport have emotional flashes, physical battles, and intense arguments during games. But the way Sophie framed it, implying that fans weren't doing enough to truly understand the players, landed like a slap in the face for a lot of people who support the league. Instead of feeling appreciated, many felt lectured. Instead of hearing an insight, they heard a critique. And it hit especially hard at a time when the WNBA can't afford to alienate the very people keeping the league afloat. What made the controversy even worse was the timing. Fans are already frustrated by rough plays, inconsistent officiating, and a sense that some players dismiss criticism as ignorance rather than engagement. So when Sophie told audiences they were misjudging the league, it felt less like a conversation and more like a scolding. On social media, people pushed back hard, arguing that fans can only respond to what they actually see. If the product on the court looks chaotic, emotional, or overly physical, that's what viewers will react to. And expecting them to decode personality nuances from a distance just isn't realistic. The gap between what fans experience and what players believe they're expressing became painfully clear. The real danger in Sophie's comments isn't the controversy itself, it's what it reveals about a growing disconnect inside the WNBA. At a moment when the league needs unity, positive momentum, and deeper fan loyalty, comments like these widen the gap. They create tension where there should be alignment. And for players already weighing the possibility of leaving for Project B's massive salaries, this divide sends an unsettling message. If the relationship with fans is already strained, what incentive is there to protect it? Sophie's comments didn't ignite the crisis, but they poured fresh fuel on a fire the league was already struggling to control.
And with everything happening around women's basketball, the timing couldn't have been worse. Caitlin Clark didn't just arrive in the WNBA, she detonated into it. In a single season, she transformed the league from a niche curiosity into a headline-grabbing phenomenon. Arenas that once struggled to fill the lower bowl suddenly sold out days in advance. Road games turned into traveling spectacles. TV ratings that had hovered in the background for years erupted into prime-time numbers networks couldn't ignore. Every metric, attendance, viewership, merchandise, and digital engagement skyrocketed the moment she stepped onto the floor. And because of that, she isn't just another rookie or rising star. She's the engine, the catalyst, the player whose presence alone makes the WNBA impossible to overlook, which is exactly why her next move carries more weight than anything the league has faced in its entire history. Behind the polished press conferences and carefully worded interviews, there's a side of professional basketball that rarely makes it into the spotlight. Veterans talk about it quietly, rookies learn about it fast, and insiders know it shapes far more than fans ever realize. Angel McCoughtry hinted at it on the Good Follow podcast, and her comments peeled back a curtain the league prefers to keep shut. She spoke about the unspoken hierarchies that govern locker rooms, the seniority rules, the ego battles, the invisible lines players aren't supposed to cross. She described the jealousies that flare when a new star starts taking the spotlight, the resentment that builds when younger players secure endorsements older ones never got, and the tension that simmers when someone becomes the face of the league overnight. These dynamics don't show up in stat sheets, but they influence everything: chemistry, loyalty, and even the decisions players make about their futures.
What makes this internal landscape even more complicated is the pressure placed on the handful of players who drive the league's popularity. When someone like Caitlin Clark arrives, she doesn't just join a team, she disrupts an ecosystem. Veterans who've spent years carving out their status suddenly find themselves sharing the spotlight with a rookie who commands national attention. Younger players who used to look up to the established stars now find themselves gravitating toward the newcomer. And the league, desperate to capitalize on the momentum, pushes that new face to the forefront whether the locker room is ready for it or not. It creates a quiet friction, the kind no one wants to acknowledge publicly, but everyone can feel. Then there's the pressure from within the team hierarchy itself. Some players are expected to be leaders, whether they want the role or not. Others are expected to defer, even if their talent says otherwise. And when players don't fit neatly into those expectations, conflicts arise. Subtle, unspoken, but impactful. Rumors suggest that some of these dynamics have already intensified as salaries and endorsements become part of the internal conversation. When one player is making millions off the court and another is struggling to cover living expenses, the idea of team unity becomes more fragile than ever. These internal tensions matter because they shape how players view the league long-term. If the behind-the-scenes politics feel draining, if the hierarchies feel suffocating, if the pressure feels unfair, then a new league offering freedom, respect, and generational wealth becomes even more appealing. Project B isn't just pulling players with money, it's pulling them with the promise of a clean slate, a chance to escape the baggage that's built up over years. And as these unspoken realities start surfacing through veterans like McCoughtry, it becomes clear that the crisis facing the WNBA isn't just financial, it's emotional, it's cultural, it's structural. And when you combine all of that with record-breaking offers waiting just outside the door, the lure of leaving becomes harder to ignore. For years, the WNBA framed overseas play as a necessary sacrifice, something players reluctantly endured just to supplement their income. Fans imagined grueling travel, unfamiliar environments, and athletes dreaming of the day they could finally stay home full-time. But veterans like Angel McCoughtry have painted a completely different picture, one that rarely makes it into mainstream conversations. According to her and others who lived it, playing overseas isn't a hardship, it's an upgrade. The salaries are higher, the treatment is better, and the lifestyle is often nothing short of exhilarating. Instead of scraping by on league minimum pay, players abroad find themselves earning 6 or 7 times more, living in luxurious apartments and being treated like genuine stars. In cities like Istanbul, Moscow, and Valencia, women's basketball isn't a secondary attraction, it's a centerpiece, and the players feel that respect every single day. What fans never see are the parts players actually talk about when cameras aren't rolling. The incredible food, the late-night adventures, the cultural immersion, the off days that turn into spontaneous trips across Europe or nights out that stretch until sunrise. Overseas teammates become family, and the support systems, from trainers to translators to team-appointed assistants, make daily life shockingly easy. There's a sense of freedom players rarely experience in the US, where every mistake becomes a headline and every rivalry turns into a debate. Abroad, players can be themselves without constant scrutiny, and that kind of emotional breathing room is worth more than fans might ever realize. This reality creates a problem the WNBA never anticipated. For years, the league assumed players stayed overseas only because of the pay gap. But the truth is far more complicated. Many players genuinely enjoy it. They thrive in it. Some even prefer it. The lifestyle, the respect, the financial security, it all adds up to an experience that the WNBA can't replicate, no matter how much it markets itself as home. And now, with Project B entering the picture, offering domestic salaries that mirror overseas money, the calculus changes once again. If players can earn millions without giving up those perks, and without returning to the lower pay and higher scrutiny of the WNBA, why wouldn't they explore that option? The part fans don't see is the emotional and cultural residue that overseas life leaves behind. Once a player experiences that level of support, freedom, and financial ease, going back to a league that asks them to do more while getting paid less becomes harder every year. The WNBA always assumed its biggest competition was geography. But the truth is, its real competition is quality of life. Project B understands that, and by blending the financial incentive of overseas leagues with the convenience of staying stateside, it threatens to erase the only leverage the WNBA ever had left. The WNBA now stands in a place it was never prepared to confront, a moment where every decision feels like it could decide the league's fate. For years, the WNBA operated under the comfort of being the only major platform for women's professional basketball in the United States. That monopoly created stability, even if the finances never matched the talent on the court. But with Project B emerging as a legitimate, well-funded rival, that safety net has vanished. Suddenly, the league is fighting on multiple fronts, losing players to overseas teams, facing internal controversies amplified by social media, and now competing with a domestic league rumored to offer salaries that dwarf anything currently possible. The question isn't just whether the WNBA can keep its stars, it's whether it can adapt fast enough to avoid being hollowed out from the inside. The uncomfortable truth is that the WNBA's current structure wasn't built for this kind of pressure. Investors have been cautious, revenue growth has been steady but slow. Collective bargaining agreements have improved pay, but not enough to satisfy players already stretched thin by years of financial compromise. And now, with speculation around Project B's multi-million-dollar deals spreading across the league, the gap between what players want and what the WNBA can afford is widening by the day. Some analysts believe new investors could step in to stabilize things, while others argue that without a complete overhaul of how the league generates and shares revenue, no amount of emergency funding will be enough. Both possibilities are on the table, and neither offers a quick fix.
The most immediate threat, however, is momentum. If even a few marquee names leave, especially stars with massive fan bases, the ripple effect could be devastating. Sponsors follow attention, networks follow ratings, casual fans follow stars. The WNBA's growth over the past year wasn't driven by incremental marketing. It was driven by cultural impact, by players like Caitlin Clark turning games into national events and storylines into must-see television. If those players start leaving, the league risks sliding back into the shadows it just escaped. And once momentum breaks, rebuilding it becomes twice as hard. But the crossroads isn't just financial, it's emotional. Fans want transparency. Players want respect. The league wants stability. And Project B is forcing all three sides to confront realities they've sidestepped for years. Some insiders think this pressure could force the WNBA to evolve faster than it ever has. Others fear that the league waited too long to address its weak points and now faces a challenge too large to overcome. The truth is, nobody knows yet which direction women's basketball will take. What we do know is that the clock is ticking, and the moment Project B officially launches, the question will shift from "Can the WNBA survive?" to "What will it look like after the dust settles?" The next era of the sport is on its way, and whether the WNBA is leading it or scrambling to keep up remains to be seen. The future of women's basketball has never hung on a tighter thread than it does right now. All the tension, all the uncertainty, all the behind-the-scenes power plays have led to this exact moment. A point where one decision made in a boardroom or whispered in a locker room could redirect the entire sport for years to come. Project B's arrival didn't just challenge the WNBA's financial model, it exposed the cracks that were already forming, cracks the league hoped would stay hidden a little longer. And now, with players weighing generational wealth against loyalty, with fans torn between excitement and anxiety, and with executives scrambling to adjust faster than they ever imagined, the stakes feel heavier than ever. Every path forward carries consequences, and every choice shapes the identity of the sport. What makes this moment so powerful is how quickly everything can shift. One major signing could trigger a chain reaction. One superstar's decision could tilt the balance of power. One wave of departures could rewrite the landscape entirely. And because Caitlin Clark stands at the center of it all, the league's brightest star, the biggest draw, the player every network and sponsor wants, her next move becomes more than a personal choice. It becomes a turning point, a signal, a line in the sand that tells the world what the next decade of women's basketball will look like. The truth is, no one can predict which direction the story will go. Will the WNBA rise to the challenge and reshape itself for a new era? Will Project B pull enough talent to create a legitimate rival league? Will players rally around the idea of building something where they already are? Or will they chase the kind of opportunity that only comes once in a generation? Those answers are coming soon, and when they arrive, they won't just affect contracts or rosters, they'll define the legacy of the sport itself. This is the moment that determines everything, and once the first domino falls, women's basketball will never look the same again.